4, follow traffic, clear visual approach, runway 4 right, maintain 17, John Austin, 5 mile final. Alright, 17 till 5 out.
How can your flight operation mitigate the rising cost of insurance? From the National Business Aviation Association, this is Flight Plan. I'm Rob Finfrock. Now, it's no secret that most pilots and flight operations are paying a lot more for insurance right now. In fact, a recent industry report stated gross aviation premiums this year are expected to hit more than $8 billion, a 20-year high. But why is that? And more importantly, what can smaller business aviation operators in particular do to keep these costs as manageable as possible? Well, we're going right to the source to answer those questions. Jay Underwood is Assistant Vice President at Star Insurance Companies on the aviation side, and he's joined by Joe Williams, Senior Vice President and Managing Director for Aviation Insurance at the Marsh McLennan Agency. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me today, especially since insurance agents and brokers are kind of the big bads in our industry right now. Each new policy or renewal is pricier than the last. But that perception really isn't fair to the work you do and the role you perform. So for all of us to understand this process a little better, what do you look for, Joe, when sizing up a flight department to either renew their insurance or sign them up as a new client?
As a broker, my job is to go to the multiple insurance companies and say, okay, look, we've got this client or prospective client, and here's their operation, here's the information that they've provided to us. Would you like to offer a quote? And what would that quote look like? What we're looking for is, it's a number of things, depending on the size of the operation, of course. We're talking about relatively small operator, so generally speaking, a single ship, King Air or Citation is broadly speaking what we're talking about. Did they fill out the application completely? Did they do it with good handwriting? Those are actually some of the things that the insurance companies will underwrite, was if they wrote it by hand, did they use good handwriting? And then also, what sort of additional information did they provide? There's a lot of opportunities on the applications that the insurance companies provide that say something like, any remarks. Sometimes people leave them totally blank. Sometimes people write in them very detailed. That's great. One of the things that we like to do is provide sort of here's how long we've known the client, here's how much we know about their training regimen and that sort of thing. And we provide that to the insurance companies as well. But providing complete information every year in a timely fashion to your broker is incredibly important.
Yeah, we're looking for your story, not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it, what's driving the decisions you're making. I think everyone fills out an application and trusts that gets across their company. There's a lot of thought that goes into the decisions you make and why you make them. And sometimes the decision may not look the best on paper, but once you get the full story, it's, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer. That's why they did that. And those are the things we're looking for. We want to know why we should insure company A versus company B.
And Jay, it goes without saying that full disclosure of any accidents or incidents is a lot better than trying to hide that information.
One of the things that we bring up quite frequently is, if we don't know something that's happened or something is left blank, odds are we're just going to assume worst case scenario. So it's better to hear from you what happened than let someone else build their own narrative around the incident. Another thing we're looking for is, just because something happened doesn't necessarily mean that your operation did anything wrong or negligent. A lot of times what we want to know is, okay, an incident occurred. What steps have you taken to make sure that doesn't happen again, or eliminating future incidents, maybe that are different from this one, but you found a hole in your system or your approach and you've managed to close that and grow as a company. Accidents happen. That's what insurance is for. But the growth afterwards is what makes partners and develops relationships.
And speaking to the importance of building a relationship between a flight department and their insurance underwriter, my third guest today is Eric Knupp, Managing Director of Flight Operations at Live Oak Bank.
Probably 6 or 7 years ago, we started to see double-digit increases in insurance premiums from a percentage standpoint. And at first, and this was with a previous underwriter and a previous broker, we were told that a number of underwriters had left the space after significant losses over subsequent years. And so that created a tightening of the market, which of course always leads to higher premiums. And so at first we said, well, okay, it is what it is. But when it happened 2 or 3 years in a row, I started paying more attention to it. And in that process, I became a lot more educated. And actually, Joe helped me to become more educated. And we made some significant changes in our own operation and the way we approached insurance. And so since then, we've been able to mitigate those premium increases each year by doing a lot of the things that Joe and Jay have already talked about. I do still hear from other operators in the space, especially small operators, that are continuing to see these pretty significant premium increases year over year. I'm also hearing that they're having more difficulty meeting some of the requirements that the insurance underwriters want to see. For instance, if you're flying a Lear or a Citation and you're trying to fill the right seat with a lower time, less experienced pilot, some of those requirements are becoming more and more difficult to meet and find somebody that actually can meet those requirements. And so that's what we're continuing to see. And I have people occasionally will reach out to me with their story and ask those questions. As an industry, we've got to get our heads around some of the things that we can do to affect change, especially listening to experts like Joe and Jay describe what it is that they really want to see out of a small operator to demonstrate what they're doing to mitigate their own risk and become a company that these underwriters really want to insure.
That's a great point, Eric. We have prospective clients call me all the time and say, "What do I have to do to lower my premiums?" I go, "Well, hang on, let's turn that around a little bit. What are you doing to be the safest operation you can be? How are you displaying that you are in fact doing all of those things?" Let's talk about your operation first. Let's represent your story, like Jay was saying. Let's tell your story in the appropriate way. But first, let's be the A plus operation that we can be. Okay, we all have to sort of live with. The owner has limited funds, so we can't get a $30 million Falcon or whatever the case might be. But we've got a $1 million 1992 King Air. Well, let's be the best 1992 King Air operator that we can. Let's start with that rather than how do we reduce our premium or how do we do this, that, or the other thing. Let's be the best operator that we can be. Now let's tell the story in an appropriate fashion.
Yeah, I agree with Joe's assessment. What you touched on at the beginning, Rob, was that insurance underwriters tend to be portrayed as the big bad company that doesn't want to pay out. But I think we need to shift our mindset, like Joe said, and say, well, they're actually entering into this relationship with us. They're taking on that shared risk with us. So how can we be a better partner? And like Joe said, be the best King Air or Citation or whatever operator that we can possibly be so that it's in our shared interest to mitigate that risk and be a better partner in that relationship.
Jay, Eric also mentioned insurance concerns when it comes to transitioning less experienced pilots in the right seat. What are your thoughts on that?
Most of the time, it's in our best interest to grow the relationship by saying yes. Typically, we write more business when we let people fly. Some of the things we're looking for is, what is the plan for this pilot? We want to know why you were comfortable with them. What is the plan on getting them up to the standard that we've grown accustomed to seeing with your operation? And I think that leads into the discussion you've raised here. It's, we don't want to be known as the people who say no. We want to be known as the people who say yes. We want it to be a dialogue between the carrier, the broker, the client. We want to know what the client's needs are and help them in their operation, not hinder them. A lot of times we just need the tools to say yes.
I think what happens a lot of times is that operators go to their broker or they read their policy and they say, oh, well, I can't find a pilot that meets the minimums to sit in the right seat. And to Jay's point, if you can have the dialogue, if you can actually open a dialogue with your broker and your underwriter and say, hey, look, this is what I'm up against. This is the person that I have found to sit in the right seat, and this is their experience level. I'm aware that that increases the risk to the operation, but here's what we're going to do. Here's our plan that we're going to put in place to address those risks, to try and offset that. And to Jay's point, if you can have that conversation, you can probably find a solution with your existing underwriter. And if not, then obviously there are other choices out there. I think it behooves you, even in a normal market, to be more proactive, to understand exactly what the underwriters are looking for, to do the things that you need to do to mitigate your risk, so that if and when the market does move against you, you can already say, hey, but here's what we've been doing all along to make us a good client to keep on your clientele list. And then I think the final thing is, and I used to also have this attitude, was there are underwriters out there that will offer certain discounts if you do certain things. And quite often, some of those things that they ask you to do might cost more than the discount that they're offering. And a lot of people will approach that and say, well, it doesn't make financial sense to spend more money on a risk mitigation tactic that doesn't get me a discount that's commensurate with the outlay of cash. And I think that is the wrong attitude to have.
And Joe, that really comes back to the underlying point of all this. Being the safest operation possible carries far greater benefits to a flight department than just lower insurance premiums.
It's important to be, of course, the best operator that you can be, because you want to keep your principal safe and their family and also their guests and your employees, etc. Having the aircraft being up and operational, of course, creates operational efficiencies. Your broker's job is to tell that story of what a quality operator you are to get you the best value deal that you can, if they're an aviation specialist, of course. So I tell clients, ask me all the time, well, if I do this training that you're recommending, like, for instance, upset recovery training or something like that, if I spend $12,000, just a number I'm saying, will that save me $15,000? And I usually say, well, no, for the same reasons that Eric just said. But it might prevent a very big claim, a total loss per se, or it might prevent this, that, or the other thing. So the goal should ultimately be to be safe for the sake of safety and to keep your principal safe, by the way, and yourself. You probably want to get home.
From an underwriting point of view, many of the markets now have safety partnership type programs that the idea behind it is they were formed to pass group buying power down to smaller flight departments that may not be able to get as affordable rating. And while these don't always provide dollar for dollar savings in years 1, 2, or 3 even, for premium, what the goal is we're trying to make the skies safer for everyone, which will in turn over 4, 5, 6 years lower the cost for everyone. If everyone holds their neighbor accountable, we can make the whole system better and stronger. And our view is one of the first steps in doing that is lowering the cost of entry to some of these programs that maybe bigger flight departments have always had access to.
Eric, what are your thoughts on such programs from the operator side?
I think we're getting to a point where we're seeing a lot easier and more cost-effective access to flight data monitoring, for example, so that you can see where you're doing well and where you have opportunities for improvement. And I think Jay touched on something that is worth emphasizing, holding our neighbors accountable. I'm pretty heavily involved with the Domestic Operations Committee as part of NBAA. And a few years ago, we rolled out a professionalism campaign because we recognize that there's a pretty broad spectrum of caliber of operators out there across business aviation. And because insurance is basically a giant pool of money that we all contribute to, ultimately we're going to continue to pay for the lowest common denominator. So until we can get widespread buy-in to some of these initiatives and some of these programs and increase professionalism across business aviation, I think we're going to continue to see premiums be on the high side. So to Jay's point, if we can hold our neighbors accountable at our local airport and try to encourage people to increase their professionalism, which then ultimately drives more engagement in these initiatives, then that's the end goal, is to increase safety and professionalism across the industry so that insurance premiums will naturally follow in a downward trend.
So to summarize, what tips would you have, Eric, for smaller flight operations that would help them understand and perhaps even better navigate this situation and maybe find ways to mitigate premium increases?
Education is the very first step. When I first reached out to Joe, he enlightened me on a lot of things. things that I had never really considered. And once I started educating myself, it really kind of opened my eyes to the way the insurance industry works. Getting to know your broker, getting to know your underwriter, showing and demonstrating, as we've already mentioned, to your underwriter why you're a risk worth taking, I think is really important.
Joe?
I realize my comment will sound self-serving, but probably the most important thing is to either find or stick with your current aviation specialist broker. A lot of people go, I've been working with my construction broker. I've got a construction business, and I'm going to stick with him, and he's doing fine. Well, in all likelihood, they are not doing your aviation insurance. They're going to a wholesaler, and wholesalers have a place, and they're fine. But it's probably not the local guy who's doing your business insurance, who's placing your turbine aircraft insurance. So if you're not working with an aviation specialist, I'd recommend seeking someone who is an aviation specialist. Sticking with them, working with them through the process, letting them educate you on the process. And if you can get to know a little bit about your insurance underwriter, meaning just who the company is, not everybody is going to get the opportunity to, break bread with their underwriter because, the insurance companies are for-profit companies. They have to run efficiently. They can't meet every single client. But get to know who your underwriter is through your broker. Let your underwriter get to know you through your broker. And just find someone that you feel comfortable with and work through the process with them in a timely fashion.
I'd highly recommend getting to know your underwriter. This is a people business. Yes, we insure your aircraft, but we pick which aircraft to insure based on the people behind the operation. I'd recommend if you're attending the MBAA convention in Vegas this October, ask your broker to set up maybe a 15 to 30-minute meeting with your underwriter. Most of the markets are going to be there. One 15, 20-minute meeting can replace hundreds of emails. Just get there, let them know your story. As we've said multiple times, it's easier to deal with people you've met in person, put a face with the name, and make it a relationship, make it a long-term relationship. That's where you're going to get yeses more often than being a new client with a new market every 2 to 3 years. Transparency is also important. So always feel free to ask your underwriter, why are you making the decision you're making as well? Why are you saying no here? What is making you uncomfortable? Hold your underwriter accountable in explaining their actions as well. And that will force the dialogue that maybe you need to have. It'll give you the opportunity to explain yourself and why there may not be another option. It's a two-way street. It's a conversation. Transparency is important. And I think we should hold each other to the same standard.
NBAA also has a wealth of information regarding aviation insurance and risk management, available at nbaa.org/insurance. One of the articles on that page is 4 questions to ask when renewing your policy. Eric wrote that a few years ago, and the information is even more relevant today, so be sure to check it out. And that's the latest from the National Business Aviation Association. Be sure to subscribe to Flight Plan on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. You can also ask your virtual assistant or connected device for the latest episode of Flight Plan, or download it directly from nbaa.org. I'm Rob Finfrock. Thanks for listening, and join us next time for a new episode of Flight Plan.
Miles right base, sending out 3500.
All right, we got him inside. We're slowing it back to 170, coming 5.